My name's William Palin. I've been living here in Spitalfields for about 15 years. I've been involved in heritage for quite some time, first as the director of a national campaign group called Save Britain's Heritage, and I've also been a trustee of the Spitalfields Historic Buildings Trust. The East End has been subject to constant change for the last 100 years or more. We've seen very important buildings lost, such as Columbia Market, for example, spectacular piece of Gothic architecture demolished in the late 1950s. You had a large amount of clearance of housing stock after the Second World War, not just slum houses, but some very good, important buildings architecturally, including two wonderful squares in the south part of the borough in Stepney, Well-Close and Swedenborg squares. It's a fight that goes on, and it's been particularly important for us all to focus our thoughts in the last few years, because there are new threats coming from the expansion of the City of London and the conflicts in aspirations between the financial district and the people that live and work here in the East End. The city fringes are very vulnerable, and we have sites such as the Bishopsgate Goods Yard, which is destined for mega development, and this is partly been enabled by a relaxation of planning rules under what's called the London Plan, which is a planning strategy for London, helped and promoted by very powerful, rich, vested interests, including the city, its developer partners, and also, most worryingly, the Mayor of London himself, who seems to be keen on promoting these very large, mega strategic developments at the expense of the quality of life and the character and the special things that make East London a place that people want to live and work in. Scale is very important for the atmosphere of this part of London, for the beauty, the views and the vistas and those things which we all take for granted but actually register with us and create a very strong sense of identity. And there is a feeling that the scale of these new developments are going to completely overwhelm those special qualities of East London. And what's always been good in a sense is that the financial district has been contained, and there's been a sort of natural point at which the transition occurs between the really tall buildings and the sort of medium rise and the low rise of the East End, and that traditionally has been Bishopsgate, the main road that runs along the eastern boundaries of the city. What's worrying now is that the tall buildings are creeping out of that contained area, and what they tend to do, it's not just the physical impact that they have, how they can change areas, make very kind of hostile areas on the ground around these tower blocks. Environmentally, they can be dark, they can be windy, they can be corporate and sterile, but also by allowing these tall buildings in these fringe areas, land values rocket. So every other building in that district becomes vulnerable. If it's not listed as a historic building, if it's not protected, that building becomes subject, or could be subject, to being bought, demolished, and a high-rise building put in its place. So there is a very strong sense that planning controls need to be in place to protect London from itself, in a sense, from as I said, from the short-term high-rise mentality of many of these developers. The battle for the heritage of the East End has been going on for a long time. One of the earliest conservation victories came on Mile End Road with a beautiful group of almshouses built in the late 17th century that were rescued and preserved with the help of someone called C.R. Ashby. And that was an exceptional piece of preservation. It was the first time this had really happened, certainly in the East End. And that prompted a series of quite celebrated rescues of important buildings, including another set of almshouses, the Ironmongers almshouses in Kingsland Road, now home to the Jeffrey Museum. And it's a great irony that the Jeffrey Museum itself has been involved in a very controversial planning case involving a project to expand the museum and demolish an early 19th century former pub just behind the museum called the Marquis of Lansdowne. We always felt this was a terrible thing, not only to lose one of the very few remaining buildings from this period in an area which has been completely bashed around, and the early 19th century streets that characterise that neighbourhood called Haggerston completely wiped off the face of the map in the post-war period. So not only was the museum destroying this valuable historical anchor, a building that on a corner of course enriches two streetscapes, corner buildings in the East End terribly important, but also it was being done by an institution whose mission was to educate people about historic interiors, and there were so many layers of irony, it was extraordinary. So we embarked in a big battle to save this building, and the Spitalfields Life blog really led the way. It was extraordinary, the interest we had from the articles that were published on that blog about the building and its history and about the campaign. And this led to the creation of a petition, several thousand signatures, a lot of very good coverage in the national press, which is terribly important. It put pressure on the museum, and it made the local authority, Hackney Borough Council, think very carefully about this. Was it a good thing after all? It had been promoted as something that was enormously beneficial, but there was also a sense that the museum could expand and integrate this building into their scheme, and that's what clearly should have happened. So the upshot of this was that the application was refused at the planning committee, a very dramatic evening at Hackney Town Hall, despite the fact that it had been recommended for approval by the council officers. It was turned down, and the museum have since changed their plans, and they've issued a statement just in the last few weeks saying that they're committed to a scheme to integrate the pub into the new design. So a great outcome, and real evidence that these big campaigns can be fought and won through social media, through blogs, and they can be a wonderful way of drawing together local people who feel disenfranchised by the planning system, and they can feel they can make a difference. People have very strong roots to the East End, even if they may have moved away, and people feel hurt and upset, I think, by a lot of what happened here after the war in terms of the fragmentation of communities, people being moved out, the landscape being altered completely, and those homely places which writers of the time referred to about the East End and characterising its special atmosphere being destroyed and lost forever. The East End Preservation Society has been launched in response to this feeling that there are many people in the East End of London who feel that the historic environment is under threat. In fact, the built environment per se, whether you're talking about 19th century buildings or whether you're talking about iconic modernist housing estates, this feeling that everything is up for grabs and they're not in control, and the people who are in control aren't accountable.
We met a sort of young developer in the road one night while putting up flyers, and he referred to the bloody public. Oh, you're the bloody public.
So what we want this new society to be is a forum for all these people and the many groups who are working hard, fighting battles, trying to educate people about planning, to come together to share information, to share experiences, and to have access to good advice and professional information about planning and conservation. So the idea is to utilise social media and have a society which is sort of built and generated by the people that come towards it and use it. And there will be workshops and formal occasions, but we hope very much that it's just a vehicle which everyone who loves and cares about the East End can use for their own aims and get support from other groups and other people and network and have a bit of weight behind.